action. For me, the most important, poignant issue that faces all of us collectively at the moment is the environmental issue. I think things, for example, like growing our own food, it's a thing that's not a luxury anymore. And I think as we go into the future, it's going to become more and more urgent that people are growing their own food and are taking more responsibility for their own energy and their own food growing and all of that. And
urban spaces here lends an opportunity for urban food gardens and to create a more kind of inclusive, self-reliant way of producing food. And the city is not open to these conversations.
Peers and people around me who would come to the farm and be like, oh, what's this? And I'd be like, it's a carrot. And people don't have an understanding of like what a carrot is and what it looks like when it's in the ground and how it gets to their plate and how long it takes to grow. And I think as soon as people start to develop a relationship with food and where it comes from, people start to make better choices. The South African case is incredibly exceptional because we have this history of apartheid which really shaped our cities. The way that our cities have been designed, our city was planned around where we wanted which race of people to live. Mm-hmm. So instead of having a really dense city, which is more sustainable, which is what we want, we have this incredibly sparsely populated city.
It was interesting to see and feel the distance and the disparities between the different groups of our Cape Town society. What I observe in the city is there is this idea of a kind of environmentalism that's primarily for the elite. And so these sort of disparities should be sort of levers for the city to say as well that something's very, very wrong about the system. But it's very difficult to speak to a city that's very much stuck in a kind of neoliberal economic policy and always just thinking about how much rates or how much income they can achieve.
And also in a country where there's such economic disparity, and this is something that Rob Small of Abelimi Bezakai says, is don't grow your own vegetables, employ somebody to grow your vegetables, or buy the organic veggie boxes because you're creating employment for someone, and that's something that we really need.
But we haven't thought about it as a city in a kind of integrated way of how we need to shift the way food is produced and how to make it more accessible. So ideas about urban gardens in our city spaces.
Places like Earth 81 provide an opportunity for that, where people can come together and the gardens that are happening there, the organic gardens, that everybody's got access to that space and where everybody can say, I can grow my own food.
Okay, so when we think about the status of Earth 81, we start with the Constitution. The Constitution establishes the right to property in terms of Section 25, which essentially freezes the status quo as at the dawn of democracy. The Constitution also, however, provides that people have a right to shelter and a right to housing. You can say then that the Constitution has two different parts which are in tension with each other. And Earth 81 then presents a perfect case of a contradiction between the two, which somehow the law has to handle. In addition to considering the Constitution, given that this is an urban area, you've got to think about zoning. Now, all urban areas are zoned by the municipality or other organs of local government. Generally speaking, you have residential zoning and commercial zoning, and then mixed use zoning. Separately from that, you have agricultural zoning. You see, there's a certain model of urban planning which South Africa has adopted, which is very orderly and rational. A decision is made at a regional level that this particular area will be given over to urban development. And what has to be done is elaborate systems of regulation have to be worked out.
There's so many vacant spaces in the city, even if it's just like a plot that's not being used, it would be great to have some transitional policy where all open spaces, and if we could use places that aren't necessarily zoned as such, or they're going to be developed in 5 years, to use it as a transitional space.
I mentioned that Philippi horticulture area supplies about 80% of the vegetables to the city. And yet the city has this idea of this development, both over aquifer and an agricultural area. It's a very important struggle that has to be taken on by the people of Cape Town.
The city is continuously eating away at this agricultural land and turning it into residential developments. They're able to produce at a scale that you need to satisfy the dietary requirements of a city.
So a secured nation, if food is secured, if a nation is secured, it's got a good, consistent food supply. If people are aware of how to grow their food. Because firstly, I think most people in their spaces should be able to grow food. Food is heritage. Food is part of each and every culture. It's the access of land. If you look in the townships, people are very concentrated. And there's no space for land. Just maybe to make an example, people that who have been benefiting RTP houses, most of them are selling now. There's no space to grow food, there's no sustainability, you have to travel. It's quite a lot.
The Constitution requires that the government take steps to provide property to those who do not have. And there's various different pieces of legislation which provide for that. Land redistribution and land restitution. Land restitution is where particular plots of people who've been evicted within living memory will be returned to the families of those who are evicted. Land redistribution is where those who are without property will be given other property as is appropriate given their particular need.
We need to go back to history, and really retrace what went wrong.
In the last 20 years is what many people see as a failure of land redistribution. Only 5% of the land has in fact been redistributed. There's a massive backlog of applications for land.
More people who are ready to give up the land properly, with the idea of it being used for farming in activities like this.
So the city for me is doing very little to create a kind of organic integration. So in a sense, I see this very bit as well as a bit of a call for citizens to demand and reclaim our space for more participatory and democratic discussion.
People need to have the option of living in the city. They need to have the option of living in an RDP house and growing their own vegetables, or perhaps having a couple of animals. People need to have this. Not everybody wants to grow food, not everybody wants to recycle, not everybody wants to reduce their meat intake, but it's important to be in a position to make those choices rather being forced into really horrendous living conditions, which is the reality for the majority of South Africans.